Hi, good afternoon, and welcome to this parallel session at the Roshan Ara, which is about unlocking the Arctic's potential, the imperative of global cooperation. And since yesterday, we have been discussing about this extraordinary shift that the region is witnessing because of the climate change, as well as the vast resources and navigation potential that the region is having. We also been discussing about the need for sustainable development strategies in the region, but we've also been talking about expanding the involvement of the non-Arctic states, and there has been some very intense discussion about that, about what kind of role the non-Arctic states can play in managing the affairs of the Arctic. But what that also tells you is that we really need to intensify the international cooperation, which is essential because of to basically unlock the region's full potential. And this actually presents a good opportunity for the like-minded partners such as India and US to actually engage in collective action, ensuring that the Arctic's transformation not only fosters sustainable development but also secures its long-term prosperity. So, to talk about these issues, today we have two distinguished experts with us here. Professor Larry Hinzman, who is the UA President's Arctic Professor at the University of Alaska, Fairbanks in the US, and he has also previously served as the Assistant Director for Polar Sciences and the Executive Director for the Interagency Arctic Research Policy Committee at the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy between 2020 and 2024. And then we have on my extreme right is Vice Admiral Pradeep Chauhan. He's the Director General of the National Maritime Foundation India. And during his 4-decade-long career in the Indian Navy, he has also served in the Antarctic. So, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us and offering us your insights. So, the format that will follow is that we'll have remarks by the two speakers for about 15 minutes each, and then we'll open the floor for the interaction. You can ask questions, but also share your observations that you have on the subjects. So, with that, over to you, Professor Hinzman.
Thank you very much. I'm very honored to be here. I thank you very much for the invitation. I've attended many of the Arctic Circle Assembly meetings over the years, many, and one of the Arctic forums. And so I really do value these discussions, these opportunities for sharing opinions. And although it might surprise many of you, I'm kind of an old guy, and having the ability to look back over 40 years, you can see that these meetings really are important, and they really do yield benefits that are hard to see day to day, but looking back, you can really see the consequences of these. And so these discussions are important. And so first, I'll thank you for your attendance, your interest, and then I welcome your comments, your suggestions about what we need to do, where we need to go from here. So as Dr. Patil mentioned, I did serve in the White House Office of Science Technology Policy. I was the Director of Polar Sciences until last May, but I need to make it clear that I am no longer an employee of the White House, and so these are my own opinions. I don't speak for the U.S. government. So many of our colleagues over the last couple of days have talked about the challenges that we're facing in the Arctic, and I don't need to repeat all those. I'm sure you've heard of them, enough of them. But these challenges, these technical hazards, these opportunities are too substantial for any single nation to take on individually. And so we really must have international collaborations to address them so we can build a better future for all. We do have tremendous challenges that if we don't address them, they will limit our potentials, limit our development substantially. And so we really have to address those. The Arctic is warming dramatically. It has warmed, as several people have said, it's the magnitude of warming, that is the rate of change, is 4 times, in some places, 4 times greater than in the global average. More importantly is the environmental responses, or the changes that we're actually seeing as a result of that. So we are seeing the decay or degradation of permafrost, the melting of glaciers, the loss of ice sheets, the subsidence of the ground surface, the impacts on the infrastructure. They're almost all negative and dire results, and so they do require some kind of response. These these impacts also have global impacts in that the Arctic is such a large region. We lose a lot of sea ice. We lose the permafrost. There are changes to the surface energy balance that will reverberate from the region to globally. And so these changes that are occurring in the Arctic do have an impact on the global climate dynamics. And so, as many people have said, the Arctic is of interest to India and the rest of the globe. And so I understand and appreciate your engagement and your willingness to partner on addressing those challenges. This does require a concerted international cooperation and collaboration to take on these challenges. The Arctic really has been blessed with a great deal of peace and prosperity for many, many decades, but also international collaboration. We've had good partnerships. The Arctic was a very investigated area during the first International Polar Year in 1882. There was a very large program there in Barrow, Alaska, which has been essentially it's a very small indigenous community, but it's grown into a little science city because it's been their work has been repeated for many, many decades. And that work really laid the foundation for much of what we know about the global magnetism, the space weather. Those observations were essential to the evolution of the sciences we have it today. So, as I was saying previously, we don't really see the impacts of the work we do until sometimes decades or even a century later. So it's really important that this work does continue, even though we may not know where it's going to lead to us. So I was also previously the director of the International Arctic Research Center, and the focus of the International Arctic Research Center was to develop the understanding of the Arctic as a system. The Arctic is part of the global system, but a change in one component of the system, the degradation of the permafrost, can lead to changes in the surface water balance. It leads to changes in evaporation, changes in convective heat transport. Those affect the cloud condensing nuclei. Those affect the transport of heat into transport of heat from the lower areas to the Arctic, the emissions of radiation to space. So those changes up there do have consequences that do affect the weather dynamics in the more temperate regions. And so understanding how a change in one component of the system might reverberate out to affect the rest of the system is a very complex process, and it's far too much for any single nation, any single research program to take on. And that's where these collaborations, these international collaborations, do pay off. I've over the many years, so I've been doing this for 40 years now. Over the many years, we've had wonderful collaborations with Russia and China and the Scandinavian nations, and their contributions have all helped us to advance the science. And we want to continue to try and take advantage of those and build upon those as best we can. I want to come back to the first International Polar Year was in 1882. The most recent International Polar Year in 2007 and 8 was really remarkable as far as what was achieved and the international partnerships that came together then to advance our understanding of the polar regions really did help, really moved us forward in many respects with understanding global climate dynamics. It helped us understand the teleconnections between the polar regions and the more temperate regions. These programs are just too massive to undertake any single nation. And so we need those contributions of observations from around the world to build these models that require that more complex dynamics, complex understanding. And so as we prepare for the next International Polar Year in 2032 and 2033, again, I encourage you to think about how we can work together. What are the big challenges that must be addressed, and how we can make our contributions of benefit to all? So please do think about that. Finally, what I'd like to also note on is the Arctic Council working groups. So the Arctic Council has been very, very beneficial for the Arctic science community with respect to establishing priorities that need to be investigated and opening up those working groups not just to the Arctic countries, but also to the observer nations. So we have incredible participation from great scientists from around the world who can contribute to these significant challenges. And I won't say that it's equal engagement. What it is, it's engagement by those who have something to contribute, so those who can take a leadership role. And so it's important that where we find the people with the passion, we find the people with the expertise and the capabilities and the interest to move things forward, that we give them the opportunity to engage. And I believe the Arctic Council working groups have really done a great job in that. So please, give them some thought, give them some consideration. Finally, I also want to just mention the IASC, the International Arctic Science Committee. I was the president of that for 4 years. In IASC, we have 5 working groups, which are very stovepipe as far as terrestrial, marine, atmospheric, social, and human. But those working groups work across those disciplines to take on these complex challenges. And again, those working groups address the primary challenges that are coming up and just build the collaborations that we need to address them. So Mosaic is one good example. It was a very large program that had huge contributions from Norway and Germany led it. The United States was a strong participant. Russia contributed several icebreakers to supporting it. There were over 100 researchers involved in that. That huge program began with a 20,000 euro grant from IASC. So those little planning grants can help us develop those concrete ideas, those concrete plans that we need to move forward. So please, engage in those working groups too. Let's see. Finally, I guess I keep saying finally, I'm sorry, I'm not going to stop. So the other thing I want to mention is just the partnership with indigenous communities. So in Alaska and across the circumpolar north, the indigenous communities have been observing and stewarding their environment for millennia. And it's really important that we can't do our research for those communities, but it's important to consider how to work with them. They've given us great ideas. They've helped us move forward. I can tell you stories of how they've enlarged my understanding of the science and of environmental processes. And so it's to benefit of everybody to work with those communities and engage these people who have a much broader knowledge, much deeper knowledge of the processes around their homes than we do. And so I think it's been wonderful for us as far as developing those friendships, but it helps the science and it helps the global communities. So as far as I think I'd like to also just take a second to talk about the cooperative mechanisms. There's been a lot of discussions over the last couple of days about conflict and cooperation, and it's important that we do strive to keep the Arctic peaceful, collaborative, and productive. We need to recognize that there are mechanisms that have worked in the past and are still there. The Arctic Council has been really important for us. They don't deal with security, but they do give us a platform from a scientific perspective and from a policy and from a social perspective to advance and recognize the challenges and the conflicts that are out there. And so we do need to support them, continue them, because of the important benefits that they provided with respect to environmental protection and sustainable development. So I just, I can't stress enough that over the years, the Arctic Council has been a remarkable success in diplomacy. We're in a tough time right now, but I know that the conflicts that we've seen in the last few years, they will end, and these partnerships can reemerge, and we need to really strive for that in all our efforts. One important thing I also want to note is that through the Arctic Council, as far as through their stewardship, it was primarily through the Arctic states foreign ministers that we developed a commitment to maintain peace and stability and cooperation through the science agreement that allowed enhanced access to other countries. It improved release of samples and sharing of data. And I believe that has been a wonderful agreement in concept. It's not been fully implemented as best as we'd like to see. So we need to really strive and push that forward as best we can. So such international science agreements that can cross borders and can facilitate these partnerships are crucial. And I think, again, the Arctic Council and other international forums are the place to develop those and promote those and moving forwards. Another aspect that is really, another venue that has been really important, I believe, with respect to fostering international collaborations has been the Arctic Science Ministerials. So our former President Obama hosted the first Arctic Science Ministerial in Washington, D.C. in 2016. The second was held in Germany in 2018, and the third was in Tokyo in 2021. Those meetings are important in that they are not just developed around the main Arctic nations, but they are developed around everybody with an interest in the Arctic. And so they're I can't say they're free and open to all, but they're free and open to the governments who want to engage. And so it's easy to engage in those from a government perspective. And again, those meetings have been very important in identifying the priorities that we need to work on to move forward, that we need to address. Out of each of those three Arctic ministerials, they've identified that observations are critical and are missing, and that we need to work together to develop a stronger, longer-lasting, sustained Arctic observing programs. And so I really, again, push that as forward as one of the priorities that we need to address. And I think I'm running out of time, so I guess what I'll do is just I want to end by just saying that the Arctic really can be a model for peaceful international cooperation, and even in this troubled world. And I believe that the spirit of cooperation that we forge in the Arctic can inspire solutions beyond the Arctic. And so I will thank you for your attention, and I look forward to discussions on how we can continue to strengthen these partnerships and to become a beacon for peace and sustainable development and shared stewardship in the future. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Professor Hinzman, for that, really bringing forth the role of the scientific collaborations in addressing some of the challenges that the Arctic is facing. And even though you said that the Arctic Council really does not include the security issues, if you expand the idea of security to include also the human security, and if you look at, for instance, the kind of work that the Arctic Council has on climate change and those kind of things, I think in that sense, it does address some part of the security as such. But thank you so much for those insightful remarks. Now, let me call upon Admiral Chauhan.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Professor Hinzman, for setting the stage for the international collaboration business. I am going to try and drill you down to India and talk to you about some of the issues that pertain to India and some of the myths, and give ourselves, all of us, some reality checks on whether or not the Antarctic is the panacea for our trade issues and so on and so forth. I basically wanted to talk to you about, people ask me, do you know, Admiral, have you forgotten your geography? I mean, do you know where the polar regions are and where India is located? And why are the polar regions of such consequence or projected consequence to India? And so I just wanted to make one out of the many issues that are relevant to the polar regions vis-a-vis India, and that is that the Arctic and the Antarctic are not simply critical to India because they hold the largest reservoir of untapped mineral or oil resources, or that they're even the largest reservoir of untapped nutrition resources by way of krill in the south. But Antarctica and the Arctic are critical to India because when we get a study correct for the Antarctic and the Arctic, we are able to better predict the Indian monsoon. When we get our monsoon right, we get our agriculture right. When we get our agriculture right, we get our economy right. When we get our economy right, we are a power. So if no other reason appeals to you than this is one of them. The second is this business of trade, and that's what I wanted to talk to you about, with specific focus on the Northern Sea route. So I'm going to ask you to direct your attention to the screen a great deal. It is true that the Northern Sea route will indeed shorten sailing distances between East Asia and Northern Europe by about 40%, and for some reason, everybody who talks about this talks about it vis-a-vis Rotterdam. However, this business of shortening of sea routes, you must appreciate, is true only for ports located north of Shanghai. If you're located south of Shanghai and guess where India is located, then this northern sea route doesn't shorten any distance at all. The problem is that north of Shanghai, ports, the seabed gradient is shallow and the ports here are prone to very heavy siltation. Thus, the business model for greenfield ports intended to be built north of Shanghai must factor very significant amounts of money outlays year on year to cater for maintenance dredging. And that adversely impacts their profitability. So one of the things that I would like everybody to bear in mind is that we can't have these conversations if nobody's going to study the hydrology of the area leading from north of Shanghai. And if Shanghai is going to be nothing but a trading hub, and that's all that we remember, we're living in La La Land. This is quite different from the business models for ports that are south of Shanghai, where the coastal hydrology is rocky and deep with minimal requirements for dredging. And moreover, if you look at the distance vis-a-vis volume, the distance via the Northern Sea route might well be shorter, but the volume of goods that can be carried in a single voyage is a function, amongst many other things, really of the ship's size and design, both of which are impacted by the depth, both the average depth and the minimum depth available along the route in question. And if you look at the Northern Sea route, the situation is grim. For example, the depth of water available in the Dmitry Laptev and the Sannikov Strait south of the New Siberian Islands is especially shallow. We're only talking about 6.7 meters. This is miserable. And so it imposes very severe restrictions upon the amount or the volume of cargo per ship. So let me try and show you a map which indicates to you what we're talking about. And if you look at the pecked circle, that contains the New Siberian Islands, and the Dmitry Laptev Strait is at the bottom, the southern tip of that particular pecked circle. And you can see the Sannikov Straits in between the two island groups, okay? Since only low volumes of cargo can be transported by a given ship, economies of scale cannot be attained. And it doesn't matter whose economy of scale they are. But definitely Indians who are out of the situation already for the reasons I already mentioned. And it is true that this is growing. It is true that in 2024, more than 3 million tons of cargo. Does 3 million tons of cargo sound like a lot? Because 3 million, wow, 3 million tons of cargo is minuscule. Of them, and there were 97 voyages, 56 of the ships that were moving on the Northern Sea route last year in 2024, only 56 ships carried cargo. The rest were in ballast. So how much is the shipping that goes through, say, the Suez Canal? If you discount the Houthis and the disturbances in the Red Sea, 56 ships pass the Suez Canal in a day. In one day. They are talking about 1 year. So we need to get some reality checks here. That means the people who are saying 56 aren't doing a comparison with 56 anything else. So then there's another issue, that a maritime trade route is not a connection between a source port and a destination port. That's not what makes a trade route. A trade route is made economically viable or profitable by having a very large number of hinterland connectivities along the way from which you can exchange cargo, bring new cargo in, dispatch some cargo. Only then does the trade route become viable. And that's what makes for a shipping line. In the Arctic, there aren't any of these hinterland routes. So without that, it's difficult to make it profitable. What about Asia's big exporters like China, Japan, South Korea? They're already planning for and investing in ice-capable vessels, of which I will talk in a minute. But the Northern Sea route will, in all probability, neither impact countries that are located in ports south of Shanghai, nor will it cause any substantial reduction of shipping through the Indian Ocean. Also, we must understand that trade with China needs to be disambiguated country by country. And so trade with Northern Europe, which is the area most relevant to Arctic shipping, accounts for less than 3% of China's overall trade, merchandise trade. And by 2035, only 3 of China's top 20 trade partners will be European countries, probably Germany, But I think that the winds of trade are shifting there as well, politically, if not physically. And perhaps France and the Netherlands, and of the top 10, only trade with Germany could potentially benefit from a shorter and more efficient route through the Arctic. What about shipyards and international cooperation in developing ice class ships? And can Indian shipyards do this? Let's take a look at our shipyards. We have 8 public sector shipyards in India. Of them, you can see that 4 of them are defense sector shipyards, and the remainder are non-defense shipyards, but public sector. And then you have a total of 22 other private shipyards in India. Of these, first of all, let me show you the list. Let me dwell on the list a little bit. Okay, if you take serial number 9, that's L&T Shipbuilding Limited at Kattupalli in Tamil Nadu. It's doing well. Everybody else is belly up. No shipyard, no private shipyard in India is currently economically viable. Not one, barring L&T. Now there is much talk about another one, and that is the sorry, it was on the same slide, serial 14. That's Swan Defence and Heavy Industries Limited in Pipavav. Earlier this was Reliance Heavy Industry and Defence. Now it is Swan. So it has the largest yard, but it hasn't got any skilled labor. And here I want to draw your attention to a pet peeve of mine, and that is the inability of Indians, at least, I don't know about the other members of this audience, they cannot understand the difference between capacity and capability. They use the words interchangeably, thereby messing themselves up in their minds completely and messing up everybody else as well. Capacity is material wherewithal. Crane, ship, dockyard, aircraft, submarine, drone, this building, this fantastic office. Capability, all that is capacity. Capacity. Capability is the human skill, the human ingenuity, the human genius that can maximize whatever capacity you have. You take this room, it's really fancy, fill it with idiots. We have great capacity, no capability. Take the shipyards. If they have great capacity, they've got a grand shipyard, they've got a great, huge dockyard, they've got fancy cranes, and they don't have any capability. How many people here in this room, for example, know how many people, skilled people, are required to run a port? Is it 6? Is it 60? 600? 600,000? If we don't know the answer to this, then we need to do some basic research first. And if you look here at this one, you will see that there are another 6 shipyards. None of them can build anything meaningful. Neither the 8 public sector yards that are controlled by the central or state governments, nor the 22 privately owned shipyards, barring, as I said, Swan and ABG Shipyard, are capable of this is only the private ones, okay? Are capable of building modern categories of ships with lengths overall greater than 250 meters, which could then generate economies of scale. So what does that mean then? Does it mean that we should put 4 limbs in the air and for Indians to do susu? Or should we just give up? What should we do? So I want to say this, that the shipyards are capable. They may not be capable of producing endpoint platforms, but they are very capable of providing sustenance. So as you move sustenance values, as you start looking at, say, for example, the Vladivostok-Chennai corridor, what will move on that corridor? Where is Vladivostok anyway? Is it actually in the Arctic? So it's clearly at the eastern end of the Pacific. But the ships that are coming there, what are the pipelines, for example, feeding into China? We all know about the ESPO, and only one spur from the ESPO feeds into China, carrying 600,000 barrels of oil per day. 600,000? China is importing 11.2 million barrels of oil per day. So these corridors can be made to grow, and they will be made to grow. Then the ships will require periodic maintenance, sustenance, and that's where the Indian shipyards should currently concentrate. Okay, I'm sorry to have rained on so many parades today, but I just wanted to say that if we get our realities correct, then we will be able to go forward with some meaningful thing other than hope. Hope is great, but hope is not a strategy. We need a strategy. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Admiral Chauhan, for that dose of reality. But then my question is, then what what should we be doing in terms of, let's say, bringing the like-minded partners together, so that that we get above some of these challenges that you talked about?
If I may answer that, is that addressed to me? Okay, thank you. Please don't think that because I've said all these harsh things about trade, that terminates our interest in or activities within the Arctic. It doesn't do that. The entire scientific body of work which is going on, which is pretty important to us, as I already mentioned. If you don't like any other activity, just take the monsoon. For us to be able to develop competence and capabilities in this area, we need international cooperation, which is exactly what Professor Hinzman said. So in capability development, remember there's capacity building and there's capability enhancement. We have capability. We would like to enhance capability. We cannot do it on our own. We need partners. And when we have partners, what kind of partners do we need? We don't necessarily need militaries, but we do. But we certainly need academia. What level of academia do we have? Can we up it? Can the academic output of our universities benefit from international cooperation? Who can argue against that? Of course. Can we develop in specific capacity terms, not capability, but capacity terms, the ability for Indian yards, specifically Indian yards in the northern and northeastern segment of the Bay of Bengal, to start to develop force sustenance capabilities, capacities, both? Yeah, we can. So should we cooperate with the United States of America, with Canada, with Europe? Of course. Is there much to be done in this direction? Of course. But should we conclude, my argument is that should we conclude that because it's shorter to go from Rotterdam to Shanghai, therefore India is in grief or India can benefit? That is my point. That we leave aside, and now the rest of the whole world is available to us. Does that answer your question? Thank you.
Thank you. Coming back to you, Professor Hinzman, you talked about all these scientific collaborations that are underway. My understanding, and maybe wrong in my understanding, most of these are also government-driven scientific collaborations. Is that correct to assume? Government-driven collaborations. There is a minuscule role for the private sector as such in these kind of scientific collaborations?
No.
I mean, so maybe you can enlighten us about what the role the businesses in the private sector are playing in advancing some of these collaborations.
Sure. So, previously, when I was working in the White House, my role was to develop the Arctic Research Plan for the United States. The way we developed that plan was we looked at the Arctic strategies from all of the Arctic nations. We looked at it from the perspective of business and industry. We looked at it from the perspective of communities. We looked at what the international research entities were prioritizing moving forward. So we balanced the priorities with what needed to be done against the capabilities of what could be done. And so the way that was implemented, then from there we had to develop an implementation plan, and that implementation plan was based upon the partnership between the private entities, the federal research community, and the other foundations and universities that could work together. And so it was far beyond governmental activities, but based upon just the opportunity and the ability of us to pull together all of these independent entities to try and to take what they could contribute and then build upon the capabilities that were needed to address these challenges. And so, no, it goes far, far beyond government entities, because you go to where the expertise is, you go to where the skills are, and you use what the capabilities what you have to get what you need to do.
Thank you. So I think let me open the floor for the Q&A and some observations if you have. So you can just raise your hand. Sir, please. Just identify yourself and then.
I am Kamdo Muthukrishnan from the Center for Arctic Studies, Naval War College, Goa. So we have promulgated our, this question is to Vice Admiral Chauhan. So we have promulgated our Arctic policy as early as 2022 with 5 missions and 6 pillars. but we have somehow not converted that policy into a strategy with viable roadmaps. That means we have a policy, but we don't have a strategy for operationalizing that policy. And it's almost 3 years since we have promulgated our Arctic policy. So, do you feel the necessity for it? That is one. Second, is there something but we do not know in the public? And third, to begin with all this, do you believe that we need to have an Arctic ambassador like most of the countries do have?
Both of you. Yes.
Hello, delegates. My name is Saksham Dubey and I'm here as a student delegate. My question is to you, Vice Admiral Chauhan sir, that you have drilled us down with the private sector of India, right? I really want to ask you that what Indian Navy readiness and maritime operations which we have seen in last years, can they come along with Arctic nations and can they conduct any search rescue trainings? Like we recently last year have seen China and Russia came along and did this maritime Oceanic 2024 joint drill. Can India also conduct this? And moreover, does India really want it? Because I'm not sure that India is in that kind of situation or Indian Navy is in that kind of situation that they really want it or not. I just want your view on this. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
I have a question that currently there is a news that National Science Foundation, they have put a halt on any type of research grant on the Arctic issue, on the polar issue. So is it right time to, when the Arctic is actually required some depth research and transdisciplinary research also. So is it the right time that this decision has been taken?
I have a question also. That was a very eye-opening and quite startling account, I must say. But I believe Russian nuclear icebreakers to be made in India, 5 of them. So how is that going to happen? I'm not too sure now that we know that we don't have ports, it seems. So if you can just tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. So this is a tough time for the U.S. scientific community, and so the president has made the decision to cut funding to several of the national funding agencies, National Science Foundation amongst them, but also including the National Space Administration. Also, NOAA has been had their funding cut for supporting research. The U.S. Geologic Survey has had some substantial cuts, and most probably dramatically, the National Institute of Health. And so, all of these entities have had their research capabilities cut substantially. Over the last several decades, there's been a real emphasis in trying to increase the engagement of minority researchers, to increase the number of women in science. And so the present administration feels that that's not necessary. And so any projects that could somehow contribute to that have been the target of that. And so it is unfortunate that to a large extent, I think they've been very naive in the benefits of this research, but they've also been somewhat ignorant in the application. So there have been several of the NSF projects. They don't want to. The administration doesn't want to support diversity funding of individuals, but when they read the projects, that also includes biodiversity. And so the way that the projects have been cut is in almost haphazard, and I think it's been very harmful to the science community, and I think it will reflect upon the whole the standing of science internationally too, is what I'm afraid. So that's kind of our reality for now.
Thank you.
Thank you. As you can see, this is not a panel that is scared of giving you reality checks. Thank you very much for yours. I just wanted to address the questions that have been raised. Thank you very much for them. To Commodore Muthukrishnan, are we making serious efforts to move from policy to strategy? So I think it is important to remember that policy is a articulation or an enunciation of a desired end state. And so in the fact that we feel that the Arctic in fact, the polar regions, both poles, are crucial to India, has little to do with the immediacy of trade. And to that extent, the Arctic policy formulated is a good policy. It strays into the areas of strategy by virtue of the, as you have already pointed out, it provides 5 missions and 6 pillars, and these are things that lie in strategy. And so if you look at it in that fashion, strategy is, okay, I'm so sorry to, let me apologize in advance for sounding pedantic. It's not my intention. It's just old habit. It is this that, if you are moving from a strategy, you're trying to differentiate a strategy from a plan, first of all. Then a plan will tell you what is to be done, which is the thing you're looking for. When is it to be done? Where is it to be done? Who is it to be done by? How long is it to be done for? And how is it to be done in the first place? And that's all what a plan does. And a strategy will answer all those questions, but it'll also answer one more question, and that is, why is it being done? And now, if you look at the Arctic policy of India, as I said, that it's a good policy. It strays a little into the development of strategy, and it does answer the questions about why are we doing this? Why are we doing it? And therefore, these 5 missions and these 6 pillars would normally have flowed out from this parent document as a secondary document by way of strategy. Strategy having been enunciated, thereafter we need to put some money where our mouth was, or at least some capacity, some capability. And this is why for example, for the benefit of everybody else except you, the Naval War College is in fact the nominated center of excellence for the development of the actual capabilities and capacities that are required in the near term, in the middle term, and the long term for giving first order specificity, second order specificity, and by third order specificity, I mean the actual plans. And so as we, in fact, look with this amalgam of policy and strategy, we look, in fact, to your institution for providing second and third order specificities. So I think that you would be in a better position to answer that element than I would. With regard to the issues raised by Saksham, is that your name? Saksham. Thank you very much for your question. And you talked about Indian naval readiness per se, and you drew our attention quite correctly to the fact that Chinese vessels were in fact in the Arctic exercising with the Russian vessels. And will India feel the need to do this over time? The answer is, of course, we will. We do not look at China merely as a risk. Many countries look at every country in some level or the other is a risk to every other country. Nobody is risk-free. So does Sri Lanka pose a risk to India? Yeah. Does India pose a risk to Sri Lanka? Yeah. But that's risk. Threat is a completely different thing. And so we think that, for example, we differ from some of the immediacies in some of the thought processes in Western Europe or in the West per se, where they look at China as a kind of risk and sort of threat, not really a threat other than the US, but they look at Russia as a threat. We look at Russia as a risk, just like we look at Iceland as a risk. We look at everybody as a risk, including ourselves. So to that extent, but China is a threat. China is a real threat, and we must remember, and I'm very grateful to you for your question, because it highlights the need for Indians to understand that the border between India and China is not some segment on the Trans-Himalayan range. The border between India and China is the whole border of India. And therefore, our need is to make sure, because we are not a postmodern navy, we are not a postmodern country, our territorial integrity is not assured. Our borders are contested, all our borders. And therefore, we must concentrate our attention upon countries like China. Now, what should we do? Sooner rather than later, I'm sure that we will start to push, because you don't, a navy, for example, doesn't guard the coastline of India by holding hands along the coast and singing "We shall overcome." We guard the coastline of India by standing on the other guy's coast, not on your coast. And therefore, if we are talking about China, we stand on where China is going, not when China comes to us. Finally, the issue of search and rescue exercises and whether that will work and whether we need that. Everybody needs search and rescue. And the skill sets required for search and rescue and the capacities required in the polar regions are different from those required in the temperate regions. The Chinese are forever telling us, or somebody or the other from China is always telling us, why don't you do search and rescue? We can come, it's a benign activity. So let me tell you that when you're searching for a man or you're searching for a submarine, the techniques are exactly the same. So we would love to do search and rescue, but in your waters. And therefore, if we go to the Arctic, we would love to do search and rescue activities, because tied up to search and rescue activities is search. And then we will do rescue as the need arises. So do we need to do it? Yeah, we need to do it. Will we do it? I think so. Russian nuclear icebreaker. So let me be clear. It's not that we don't have ports or we don't have shipyards. What I'm trying to tell you is that the ability of the current and ability of Indian shipyards to make high-end ice-class ships is a distant second. We now need to make non-ice class ships. We need to make merchantmen by the score. And our government is to be commended for the amount of effort it is putting in to ensure that this happens. Making a nuclear vessel at all is we operate nuclear powered submarines that we have designed and built. We're very proud of it. But therefore we know the difficulties involved. To make a nuclear powered icebreaker, 5 of them, it's great for a meeting with the Russians. It's great for, I don't think it is attached in any way to reality. At least not in the foreseeable future. So should we not build towards that ability? Of course we should. But where should we put the expectations of our timelines? That is an important thing. So does the statement of intent automatically translate into immediacy of development? No. So should we do one? Yes. Should we believe that we are doing the other in the immediacy? No.
Thank you. Let me take one more round of questions.
I just have a couple of quick questions. First, thank you, Larry, for the work. Yeah. Thank you, Larry, for the work done during the last IPY. And I think without you and the team and Dave Carlson, I don't think Apex or PEI would have existed. But one question I had quickly was with the upcoming IPY and most of SCAR and IAS cramping up their projects, the third pole is missing from a lot of conversations. Would it be wise for India to pick up the third pole or treat it separately in the conversation? And one thing for Vice Admiral Chauhan is, as an interest in wildlife and photography, I can go to the North Pole, I can go to Novaya Zemlya, I can go to Wrangel Islands, but the Laptev Sea, the Svarnaya Zemlya and the Anzu Islands, I can't do a project like what Polar Stern did, which Larry mentioned in the Mosaic project. So what would it take for an Indian set of scientists, researchers, photographers to be present in the Russian Arctic doing research for a period of time? What would be the roadmap for that?
Hi, my name is Nehal and my question is directed to Mr. Larry. So you mentioned about international cooperation being important, and I would like to highlight about the India and US relations. Recently, NOAA's Arctic plan and strategy came out in early 2025, and they really focused on building bilateral relations with all the Arctic Council countries and the member states and the observer states, except India. There was no mention of India having a bilateral relationship with India on the focus of Arctic. So I would like to know more thoughts or any context as to why this was there. Yeah.
Thank you, delegates, for your remarks, and it was very insightful. I'm student delegate from Ambedkar University. My question is in respect to the unlocking the Arctic potential in the era of expanding scientific presence in the Arctic itself. How does India plan to incorporate, or much of more global South plan to incorporate traditional ecological knowledge of indigenous people into the larger scientific research framework? Because I think it's very good imperative to acknowledge it, and it's other game to actually practicalize that process itself. So how does India or bigger global South players can do that? Yeah, that's all. Thank you.
I'm concerned about Canadian Arctic, that after the Arctic melt, what would be the actually geographic of this Nunavut, which comprise nearly 60,000 or 30,000 islands. It has been. So this is the geography is also not very clear. So what would be the future of United Nations Convention on Law of Sea, which is totally based on the geographical features?
My large extent of question is covered by fellow mate only. Just to adding on to that, I wanted to ask that. So you have given us a reality check on different kind of things, but I just wanted to ask if any problems comes out, we solve it with education. And for education, we need fellowship programs, more from Arctic nations, inclining towards moreover like Indian University, especially Delhi University and different kind of university we have. So in future, can we have these kind of programs, or how much time it will take? Because we are eager to join in.
Boy, that's a lot. So in the time we have left, I'll talk really fast. I'd love to have a discussion with each of you on all of these issues. So I'll start in the back and work forward. So with respect to fellowships, so I've had many wonderful Indian graduate students, PhD students, and postdocs. And right now, I think like I said, keep saying that we're in a bad situation. I don't believe that's going to last. I think that in short order, the United States will realize that this is not a good policy, and this will switch back. So our government, if you look back over the last 40, 50 years, we oftentimes see a pendulum swinging back and forth. And so unfortunately, we don't have the stability that the Indian government, I think, or many other governments have with respect to a strong bureaucracy. A strong bureaucracy is a good thing. We have a strong executive, and so the situation changes rapidly. So I don't think this will last. I think we will come back to that. I think that the benefits of that are too apparent. With respect to UNCLOS, with respect to the law of the sea, the United States has not signed UNCLOS because it reflects international law very well. And with respect to the policies or the perspectives of the international law are things that the United States does adhere to. And so we will continue to abide by that international law, although I don't anticipate the United States will sign UNCLOS in the near future at all. And I don't think that's necessary for us to still respect and maintain our good relations with other nations. With respect to the IPY, maybe I'll combine this with respect to India too. And so I'm not sure where the lack of relationship with India came from. I didn't see that. I don't foresee it. I can't understand how that could have happened. As I mentioned, we've had strong partnerships with India for many, many decades, and I think that that's going to continue into the future. And I think with respect to the engagement of Indian researchers in the third pole in the Himalayas, the United States has partnered on many of those glacier studies for decades and decades. I think we understand the importance of those hydrologic dynamics, the importance of that water resources for 1 billion people. We understand how those resources control global climate dynamics, how it controls sea level rise. So I think that work should not wait until the next IPY. That should be continued now. It should be emphasized. It should be contributed to by many nations, not just India, not just China, not just Pakistan, but that is something that we've partnered on in the past, and I hope we will continue to work on that. Okay, well, thank you all for your discussions. I'd be glad to continue any of that conversations following this if you wish.
Okay, so I'm going to follow Dr. Hinzman's example and speak really fast. What would it take for Indian scientists, both not only in the STEM science, and I really appreciated your question in the last session. I entirely endorse it. So what would it take? I think what it takes is for the social sciences to speak up. we have regrettably in many public articulations officially declared that science is relating to science, technology, engineering, mathematics. And so the social sciences, the humanities, the movement from STEM to STEAM, it just isn't happening. And it isn't happening because the most affected people aren't speaking up. And so ideally you would like the government to solve problems before they are articulated by civil society, but if they are not, then civil society has a major role to play in this. Where it comes to this business of education and fellowship, I think that has been answered here. I could not agree with you more that if you want to improve the country as a whole, its security, its holistic security, I'm not talking about military security. At no stage have I spoken except in answer to one question about military security. But when we talk about the third pole, there are significant pure security concerns. You have a number of GLOFs, glacial lake outburst floods, and it will destabilize all of the Northeast, and that will destabilize the rest of this South Asian continent as a whole. As it is, you've got Nepal struggling to handle the relationships between monarchy, democracy, and communism. And you bring in four natural disasters of major magnitude, it will have ramifications downstream. Exactly what they are is a separate issue. And in the same breath, I wanted to also address your question, ma'am, about geographies and the law of the sea. This is an area that we specialize in quite a lot. If the Arctic and the Greenland ice sheet and the Antarctic ice sheets melt, you will have a sea level rise of somewhere in the region of 67 to 70 meters. 70, not 7. And then that means that, this argument about the northern sea route will stop because there won't be any ports at the other ends if everything is inundated. We don't think that will happen. We think wiser counsel will prevail. But not all contributions to sea level rise, for example, are anthropogenic. Several of them are natural, and we can't handle the natural ones. So I just think that the geographies and the relationship between the geographies concerned, and you're quite right in connecting the two for the law of the sea. I think that if that sort of situation arises, the law of the sea will be revisited, but it has to be revisited inside the framework of the law of the sea. It took us something around 30 odd years to get to a point where UNCLOS was capable of being signed. It wasn't some great constitution of the seas as it is being bandied about. It was one of the greatest compromises in the world. But it was required. And can you imagine trying to do that all over again? It will be a disaster of very large proportions. I think that this business of third pole melt has not been understood adequately. I entirely agree that we need a full-fledged session. There are issues of salinity change. There is an issue of if salinity changes, then naval officers are very deeply involved. If the infrastructure, we believe that navies will somehow magically come to the assistance of civil society. But navies also operate from harbors and from ports. What happens when their ports go underwater? What then? And so there is a need for some quantified studies. There is a need to understand this whole business of the third pole, its impact on the monsoons, their impact, and that it's a can of worms that needs to be opened. But for that, we need a bigger can, because once you open a can of worms, you need a bigger can. Thank you.
Thank you so much. As you can see from the screens, we are out of time. But please do join me in giving a huge round of applause to all our wonderful speakers. And we take a quick 15 minutes break, and then we go back for the next plenary session. Thank you so much.